All right, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for today's first Lunch and Learn of 2022. We're really excited to bring this addition to our Learn series to all of you. A huge shout out and thank you to our sponsors, Borg Warner and the Tompkins Trust Company. Today, we'll be doing kind of I won't call it a deep dive, but we'll definitely be having a really engaging conversation around insurance and legal industry insights in regards to impacts and effects of COVID-19, a topic that, yes, we are still talking about in 2022, but it is very timely, and we've been able to put together a really great panel today of some experts in the legal and insurance field to tackle any questions that you may have and a couple of questions that were submitted to the Chamber Direct. So we're excited to have you all with us, whether you're in person today or whether you'll be watching this video later on our website. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. In the event anyone has any questions for our panel, please feel free to submit those to myself or Carly Hansen in the chat, and we will address all those questions at the end of the Q&A. Hopefully everybody's taking some good notes, and we'll have some questions at the end of this discussion. And without further ado, I would like to take the time to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves and get a little bit of their background, who they are, who they work for, and what brings them here today. Let's start first with my box to the right, Miss Carrie Pollak. Did I say it right? Pollak?
It's Pollak, but you're not the first person to do that. It's probably not as hard as Joseph Giordano, but it's like permanently misspelled and mispronounced. Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Pollak. I'm a partner with a law firm called Hancock Estabrook, and I'm a corporate attorney, and I work with mostly nonprofits, but a fair amount of for-profits as well. Most of my clients are larger, I think, for relevance to this discussion. And so what I came here prepared to talk about really has to do with like managing employees and kind of like colleague type of liabilities when it comes to COVID-19. So that's my specific thing that I'm available to talk about. But also in the nonprofit world, if anybody has any questions about the specifics about the way tax exempt organizations work, I am also well versed in that.
Awesome. Thank you for being here today, Carrie.
Thanks.
Next up to my left, I have Chris Roscoe.
Here. I'm Chris Roscoe. I work with Bailey Place Insurance here in Ithaca. We have offices in Cortland and Dryden as well, and a satellite office in Rochester. And I focus on business insurance for small, medium, large businesses. We also do personal, home and auto and renters insurance, things like that. So I'll be focusing on, explaining some of the issues behind some of the insurance, kind of what we're looking forward to seeing in the market in the next few years, and kind of how we were able to pivot during the pandemic, which we all had to do. So that's me.
Always fun to hear people use the word pivot.
That word pivot.
And yeah, we should, next time for our next Lunch and Learn, we're going to turn it into a drinking game. And anytime someone says the word pivot, they'll have to take a sip of tea.
Good.
All right. And last but not least, joining us, we have Serenna McCloud.
Hi, everyone. Well, it's a good thing that I don't use that word pivot. So because if I did, I would have to leave and go to the bathroom, given the the rules. So anyway, so my name is, I'm sorry, David, the pronunciation isn't exact. It's Serenna, but it's hard to tell from just reading it. So my name is Serenna McCloud. I'm an attorney. I am proud to say I work for myself. I have my own firm. It's located on 408 West State Street. My 3 practice areas that I'm incredibly fortunate that I exclusively practice in, and I'm looking the wrong way because my big screen is here and my little screen is here. So you guys are here, but I should be looking here. So now I'm just looking at files on my computer. But anyway, I'm blessed that I have been incredibly busy in real estate, trust and estates, and business law, and I haven't had to do any other areas of the law. because I love what I do, but I'm not interested in anything else legal. So trust and estates is doing wills, writing trusts for folks. A lot of people, I guess I don't want to go on too long about that. So those are my areas of focus. If anyone has questions in those areas, I'm happy to elaborate on what exactly I do, or, any other questions.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for telling me the proper pronunciation, Serenna. I literally was like patting myself on the back, but I was saying it what I thought was the right way, because I heard someone else call you Serena. So Serenna is.
So the thing is, I honestly don't notice, because I get, and now I'm going to, well, I'm not going to say all the names that I get called, because then I'll be totally confused. When people say Serenna, then I'm like, oh, I notice it, because I'm like, that's like my mother or somebody that I really know, because I usually don't correct people, because it happens to me my whole life so much that effectively it's my name. But I've run into problems where like I had this woman that I really, really loved and respected. She was awesome. She said my name wrong forever. And one day she heard me say my own name, like in this kind of a forum. And she was like, I can't believe you never told me. Like, I feel like such a jerk.
Well, it happens like that. So thank you for the correction. If I say it wrong again, just like give me like a signal or something, and I'll be sure to fix it. All right. So again, thank you to our panelists for being here today. I do want to kind of just jump right in. And one of the first questions I have for you all, I kind of alluded to this in the beginning, but as we continue to deal with all the impacts of COVID-19 and its unprecedented effects on business operations throughout the nation, what would you say are some of the biggest issues that your clients are most concerned with right now? And what are like the most prevalent questions that you're getting from them? And for this one, I'm actually going to throw it back to Serenna to get us started on that.
Okay, so given my areas of expertise, well, estate planning has been incredibly busy. So with all of the death and fear of death and illness and incapacitation, people are coming in droves almost. It's like it's lit a fire under people to finally get their wills and powers of attorney and healthcare proxies in place. And guardian, if people have underage children, guardianships into their wills, so that in the off chance that something happens to them, all of those things are in place. Because as you know, a failure to plan is a plan to fail in a lot of cases. Real estate has been off the wall, especially from it's a seller's market always in Ithaca. And the minute anything goes on the market, it sells. There's a lot of cash buyers looking for investments. A lot of people are starting Airbnbs in the area, and they're paying cash. And so that hasn't slowed down. In terms of my business practice, a lot of people are forming LLCs, getting into contracts, getting into leases. I think a lot of people have, it's been a, time of reflection, and people are finally saying, you know what, I don't want to work in this job anymore. I don't want to go back to work. I'm going to start my own business. So I've seen a lot of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Serenna. Next, let's throw it to Mr. Roscoe.
So, in terms of insurance, a lot, what most of our clients are coming to us with questions are, is my business going to be covered if it shuts down, due to a spike in the pandemic, or, my employees are all gone now because they're all sick. Is that covered under what they call business interruption coverage. And, you know, unfortunately, the answer to that is likely no. Communicable diseases and things like that are usually excluded from those types of policies. Usually there needs to be some sort of you know, covered property damage or something like that to cover business interruption, to have that coverage kick in. So then, you know, then the question sort of becomes, can I get a discount on my premiums if I'm shut down? And sometimes the answer to that is yes. You know, we were able to reach out to all of our clients and try to get them, you know, the businesses that were shut down, we could try to negotiate reduced rates while they were shut down, especially for like not-for-profits, because they're, you know, they were less exposed to risks while being shut down. So if that were the case, we were able to, you know, negotiate better rates for them. But you know, typically that coverage is not, typically communicable disease related to COVID is excluded from that type of coverage. And, you know, unfortunately, that's the answer. You know, the questions we're getting are mostly related to, you know, people are seeing the rates going up and things like that, not necessarily just because of COVID, but, you know, lots of extenuating circumstances regarding global warming and increased claims from weather and fires and floods and things like that as well. So we do feel a lot of questions like that, but we're going to what's called like a hard market. So it's, everyone's kind of seeing rates going up. So we're, you know, we're trying to sort of lessen that blow for our clients, but that's kind of what we're steering towards at the moment.
Thanks, Chris. All right, Carrie, I'm gonna let you take us home on this one.
So the questions that we've been asked over COVID have varied. They've mostly been all the questions that everyone here has been asking about themselves, right? Like the whole way through. But what we're seeing nowadays are questions about the ever-changing rules regarding like sick leave and testing mandates, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, all those questions. Specifically, we're dealing with employer-based questions like how do we manage our workforce? What are the things that we have to put into place? Do we have to provide sick days if somebody lives with somebody who has symptoms and they're getting tested? Is that covered? And that's from like the employer perspective. And then I would say like the non-employer perspective, just companies in general, nonprofits and for-profits both, everybody is kind of grappling with a new reality. It's not necessarily like a tangible difference. It's not as though transactions are different than transactions they would have gone into before, but everything seems a little precious, right? They don't know what money is going to be in the pipeline in a year from now. They didn't know 3 years before either, but it's just a little bit different. And I'm seeing some evidence that at least with the tax exempts, that New York State is tightening their belts a little bit. And so there's closer scrutiny to grants and grant requirements coming down the pike. And I don't even know if that's going to be like a permanent thing or a short-term thing, but there seems to be a fear that state funding is going to be disappearing or at least a lot harder to get and to keep.
Thank you, Carrie. And, you know, so for the follow-up question to this, and it's actually pretty cool because Chris, you alluded to this a little bit in your explanation of the first question. It would be interesting to hear more about how the pandemic has shifted your internal day-to-day operations within the industry and the services that you offer. And you kind of touched on this, Chris, when you stated how you guys have gone back and you've like reduced people's premiums for not-for-profits because their risk exposure has decreased. It's not something that you would typically think of that insurance companies would do, but it's a good reflection of showing an understanding of the impact that COVID has had across the industry and how your businesses have been able to rebound and adjust. And Serenna, you talked about how you've been offering more information about real estate. So it would just be interesting to hear more about how your day-to-day has shifted as a result and how you've seen shifts and trends across the industry as a whole. And I'm gonna actually start with Carrie for this one.
It is very funny to me, the learning curve that COVID has been for all of us. I'll just give an example. I gave a presentation after COVID started, when I was back in the office. So sometime I would say over the winter of 2020 to the spring of 2021. And it was a presentation like this, and there was a presenter before me, and I was walking around my office practicing, and I didn't realize the mute button was not hit. So this poor guy's presenting, and then there's like somebody muttering off in the background, like introducing myself. But I think we have all gone through like a real, just like we have to get used to the new normal. So for me and myself, I don't think that what I personally provide is very different. I will say that. So I'm at a larger law firm with different practice areas, and two of our bigger practice areas are healthcare. They deal with healthcare providers, and then labor and employment. And those two departments have just been on fire, just like the house is burning down, because literally day by day, I mean, the Supreme Court ruling last week about the large vaccine mandate, I don't know if that directly affected all of you, but it affected me. It has been nonstop for them. So that's been real. And sure, in the more kind of like superficial way, I don't meet with people in person nearly as much as I did. I went for a long period where I don't, but I think that for me, the time savings and convenience of like remote work is really beautiful. And I think that opens up a lot of opportunities for hiring and other business collaborations. And that's just kind of like a social, cultural thing that I'm excited about.
That's a great answer. I'm gonna throw it over to you now, Mr. Roscoe.
Yeah, so we did change a lot. I mean, we were considered, essential personnel here. So, we did offer some of our employees to work from home if they needed to. We did have some increased expenses for adding, remote workstations, increased cybersecurity, for our network, for those remote workstations. But we did also make some positive changes. With the pandemic, we actually called not just businesses or clients that we thought would be affected, but we actually took time to call every single client that we had, to check in, see how they're doing, and to see if we can offer some kind of help in the form of rate negotiation. A lot of insurance companies, for just personal clients, for their auto insurance, were offering reduced a reduced premium or a kickback of, not much, like $30 to $50, but at that time, and for a lot of people, that $30 to $50 goes a long way. And so we were able to, sometimes negotiate that kind of refund because, people weren't driving as much. So the insurance companies were okay, kicking back a little bit. And for larger businesses, again, like I said, for not-for-profits that, were shut down for a period of time, we were able to negotiate reduced rates for them. And, while that was not beneficial to our bottom line as an agency, it was really the right thing to do. So, we were happy to do that because, the pandemic was affecting everybody. And in terms of, day-to-day operations, like I said, we did allow folks to work from home. We did implement a risk management position for some of our clients. So it's a specified position where our employee would manage information, risk management information, communicate with our clients, do loss control, and that was helpful for a lot of our clients. Again, virtually, we had to move to virtual meetings. We've done a lot of Zoom meetings now instead of in person. We like to do in-person stuff. Face-to-face is a big part of who we are. But we moved to Zoom, and we did that for quite a bit. Some clients who were okay meeting face-to-face, we were happy to do that as well. And then we also kicked on we have an online platform for our clients to use where they can log in from home and see all of their certificates of insurance, see their policies, see any claims, and they can track them themselves. And that kind of automation was important for some of our clients as well.
That's great. Yeah, lots of pivoting and changing going on in the industry that is very reliant upon relationships and face-to-face conversations. So I'm excited to hear that from both of you. I would love to hear this legal perspective from Ms. McCloud. Sarah, no, you're muted still.
Yeah.
Sorry. So like everyone else, worked from home originally, started using Zoom. I still meet a lot of my clients. Well, actually, I give the option. I kind of prefer in person, but it's good to have that option even for me. So like you can schedule out your day more if your commute is just from Zoom to Zoom. So anyway, I give my clients those options. Deep in the pandemic, like I traveled to people. There was to do their will signings, whereas usually they would come in. What was I gonna say? Oh, there were executive orders in place, which most of which have expired to allow, and they were super complicated anyway, but because certain things in estate planning have to be done with a wet signature. There were provisions in place that allowed like remote notarization. You probably know about this as well. But anyway, they were super like convoluted and annoying, but we did do a couple of those. I had a client with actual COVID, and he was in the hospital, and like I had to watch him on Zoom, sign the paper while I explained the power of attorney to him so that his kids could handle his affairs. Yeah, and I represented the first person to die of COVID in Tompkins County, the family in a state administration. It was a sad situation, but he had a very long, interesting life. He was 96. So let's see, in real estate, this is a big change. It used to be like the stereotypical closing would be the realtors, the buyer's attorney, the seller's attorney, the lender's attorney. And so there would be a full room. Now, if you represent the seller pre-signs all of the transfer documents and sends it to the buyer's attorney to hold in escrow until they get the money. And then you release, they're trusting you to do that. Whereas before, everyone wanted to be at the table and have everything change hands at once. So that cuts down on the number of people in the room. It also cuts down, actually New York State was like more traditional in that they still did closings that way. It's like 18th century way of doing closings. And other states had kind of modernized that long ago. So this forced New York State to real estate traditions to mostly catch up with the rest of the country. I think that's enough.
I have a follow-up question to that, just a quick one. I'm gonna interject. Do you feel that having to remove all the people from the room and from the process, do you think that has expedited the process for people in terms of closing on homes, or has that part of it not necessarily changed or caught up yet?
That part hasn't changed really at all. The change is who comes to the closing. All the same people are still involved. So you still have your lender, your lender's attorney, unless it's a cash deal, which around here it's likely. So you have your lender, your lender's attorney, your realtors, all of them are involved. They're just not, they're social distancing. So they're just not all in the room at the same time, but they're all still involved in the same ways they were before. And I really don't see a lot of change in terms of the speed or if in fact it might be slower because people are working from home.
Got it.
You
Okay.
know, people are getting coronavirus and quarantining and what have you. Anyway.
Okay. So for this next question and the way this one will be answered, we kind of did this a little bit briefly as we were getting like set up and everything, but I think this one would probably be most impactful if it were just kind of like open dialogue between the three of you, given that it's going to be so many levels of intersection around this topic. And Serenna actually kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, talking about how people should really be putting a focus on getting their affairs in order in terms of wills and estates and things like that. But what can make that a little bit challenging right now is that we know the availability of insurance coverage for pandemic-related losses is still very far from certain in a lot of cases. So using your expert opinions, what are some imperatives, like priority ones, that you feel that business leaders should be making decisions upon right now, given kind of some of those uncertainties in the insurance space in terms of coverage? And all three of you can unmute and just kind of, whoever wants to jump in first on that.
Sure, I'll jump in. You know, we encourage businesses to, at this time at least, take a look at their insurance. As I said before, we are kind of going towards what's called a hard market, which is driven partially by COVID, and then also other, increased claims due to, all kinds of things, global warming, cyber claims, things like that, have increased with, remote working and, business largely moving to being done online in a lot of cases. So I encourage, everyone to take some time to look at their policies, shop them around in the next year or so here, to see what they're, see what they're paying, see if there's anything they can do to, get the right coverage that they need, or pay a little less for it. Mostly make sure that they're covered for what they can be covered for. A lot of clients aren't going to be covered for losses due to a pandemic. And with the lawsuits that are happening now, the outcomes of those lawsuits are going to, determine where the market's going to go and determine how insurance companies are going to write business risks related to pandemics. We'll see that being excluded in a lot of cases. So, making sure you're insured for everything else, working on a nest egg, the PPP loans and things like that really helped employers out with employee retention. But from an insurance standpoint, make sure you've got the coverage you need.
So from my perspective, working with kind of companies, I would say that it seems really unlikely that there's going to be very much insurance coverage that affects us for what we're doing. In general, I've seen contract provisions. Now they all specifically exclude COVID-19 as a condition to performance. So what does this mean? I think with the employees that I'm dealing with, with companies that I'm dealing with, first of all, for almost every company, the biggest liability that you have out there is employment-related liability. For nonprofits, there's no question about it. Your biggest liability is employment-related liability. And what is your obligation to your employees about dealing with COVID-19? Don't be flagrant. Even if you think what the law is asking you to do is too much, just really be diligent to try to provide a safe and healthy environment for your employees. That is the one thing you really need to do. If you don't do it and somebody out there thought you were grossly negligent, which I think, lawyer words, what do they really mean? Let's just imagine there are we've heard some stories, right? Like some of the meat packing factories and their COVID outbreaks, when they're dealing with employees that are like this and they're not being given proper equipment to protect themselves, that I don't know anything about those, but to me, that seems like something where the word gross negligence could apply. I think for most of my, most of the people that I work with tend to be in office environments if they're not in healthcare. It's kind of like healthcare and office environments. And you just got to mind your P's and Q's about social distancing and make sure that you're accommodating what the employees think they need to feel safe. That's the thing that I think you need to do to most limit your liability and risk.
So I agree with that. And I also, Carrie touched on this a little bit, but just to flesh it out a little more, I think a lot of businesses and between like business to business or business to client or customer, their agreements allow an out should they be shut down due to a pandemic. So this would apply in the case of like a lease. And if your building is empty and you want to attract new tenants, but the tenants are scared to commit because oh gosh, what if there's another shutdown, which is a completely real possibility. So a lot of landlords are now willing to say, we'll let you out if a pandemic is declared, or there's a government shutdown of your business. The same goes for like vendor contracts or contracts for like in-person events. A lot of event hosts or event spaces are saying, if you want to go ahead and book your event, and we'll give you back your deposit if there's a shutdown. So like usually if you cancel, they would keep your deposit, but now they're being more flexible to, as Chris mentioned earlier, kind of there's no insurance for this. So you're internalizing your risk, but you're also hopefully, if we ever get out of the pandemic, or if it doesn't get worse, then people are able to do business as best they can in the meantime.
There is just to touch on that briefly there, for the things like events, fundraisers, weddings, things like that. There was there still is event cancellation insurance, which is something that some of those policies do cover.
Pandemic,
yeah, or communicable disease. And so we were able to for some of our clients, we were able to add that event cancellation coverage.
What kind of business would have that? Like
so a lot of not-for-profits have fundraising events that were canceled. Theaters they rely on shows and plays for income. And so a lot of those were all canceled. And so we were able to reach out to some of our clients who, relied on some of that event income and add that event cancellation insurance for them. And I think here we had about $30,000 in payout made to our clients because of that, just because of the pandemic related cancellations for their events. And so, going forward, we'll see how those things change. There were a lot of larger events that had huge payouts for event cancellation policies due to the pandemic. Wimbledon, the tennis tournament had, it was like a $25 million payout for the cancellation of Wimbledon.
Yeah, it was actually the largest insurance payout ever for that type of event, correct? Yeah. I remember that made like national news. It was a huge deal.
Wow. I'm really glad that you talked about that, because I that wasn't really on my radar.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of big organizations, nationwide that have that kind of insurance, large music festivals, things like that.
Right. Yeah, I thought they were just losing out. pretty much.
Yeah, no, there are policies for event cancellation that are all cause policies, which include communicable disease, which did fall under, the pandemic did fall under.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, part of to Serena's point, part of the reason why that payout was such a huge deal for Wimbledon is that a lot of these organizations and professional organizations that put on big events like that didn't know that communicable disease was something that they could include in their policy.
Right.
And Wimbledon actually was one of the few organizations that took the time to
They
pay that
did it,
extra
I
premium.
think I was reading they did it back with the first SARS virus outbreak.
Yes.
So they had that. They paid, you know,
Yep.
millions of dollars in premium
Yep.
to keep that policy in place. And then they had a huge, I think it was like they paid like $25 million in premium, and then they had a like $100 and something million payout.
I'm feeling a conspiracy theory coming on.
Look at the numbers for that. But so those kinds of policies did exist. You know, more locally, we were able to add that coverage to some of our clients that that needed it. And we, you know, locally, we did have our clients had about a $30,000 payout for event cancellations because of the pandemic, which was great. But it's only some things, you know, and there's a lot of other people who had to shut down and didn't have anything to do with events. So
Yeah.
you know, we're trying to help our
you know,
clients out wherever we can.
I kind of want to shift the gears a little bit and start talking about some of the things via some questions that were submitted that Carrie had brought up around employee-related liability. And so it'll be great if you all want to just popcorn some of these answers to some of these questions. The first one we'll start with is, how should an employer respond to an employee who resists returning to on-site work due to fear of contracting the coronavirus?
And that's been my song and dance for a little while. It's really interesting to me, just like as a human, how minute the differences are between people that led them to have a variety of reactions to the pandemic. I don't know if this is consistent with all of your experience of it, but some people I worked with were scared out of their minds, and other people I worked with were like, whatever, let's move on. And I think from an employer's perspective, it's really interesting because you have to balance that human component, which is true and real for all of us, with the real need to just like get back to work. So like I said, we deal with all sorts of industries, but healthcare has been pretty brutal. I mean, it's in the news every day, right? Like what is going on with the healthcare staffing. But putting that aside, I think the answer is to provide a safe and healthy environment. If it's time for people to come back and that's what's right for your mission, and I'm just going to pretend for this discussion that it's right for people to be back, it's time for your mission. I think you have to be very respectful and yet firm about what this means. And so from a legal perspective, an employer has the right to require people to come back. Your employees have the right to, this is the same analysis, by the way, with whether an employer has the right to mandate a vaccine. You have the right to do that. This is you're not the federal government. We're not worried about the Constitution. I know for-profits that mandated the vaccine in June of 2021, which just floored my mind, but they did it. Your employees have the right to request an exemption based on disability or religious exemption. And you have the obligation to evaluate that exemption and see if there's been a way that you can accommodate it. In the healthcare world, what was really interesting from a legal perspective is the rules that New York State put out actually changed that analysis. And so this is constitutional law and has been going on for a long time. And it's the same kind of, it's basically disability, right? If anybody knows anything about when somebody says, you need to give me an accommodation, I'm not capable of performing my work at this desk, and then the employer has to work with you in a back and forth discussion. When it comes to the vaccine or other types of things, such as like making you come back to work, what types of accommodations you need to have. What New York State did was they changed that constitutional analysis that had been in place for like 30 years. So that's very interesting for people to pay attention to. And I really don't know personally what I think about that. You know, like, I feel like I'm much more a witness to history right now than I am like somebody with an opinion about history.
How did
and I'm
it
trying,
change? How did it change? Like, what was it before and what is it now?
so it's all up in the air, but just an example, New York State pretty much got rid of the religious exemption for vaccine mandate in New York State. They just said there is no religious exemption to this.
Does that apply to just like state employees? Or can, like, if I'm an employer and I wanna I will allow a medical exemption, can I?
Yeah, so this really isn't about state employees. That specific rule had to do with healthcare employees. So
Okay.
nurses, CNAs, that's specific there. But that's a massive industry. I mean, who on this call doesn't have a nurse in your life, right? It's a really broad reaching change. And so personally, I'm trying to find a lot of grace for everybody trying to sort through this nonsense because it feels kind of crazy. So I'm sorry, I just talked a whole bunch, but that's what my answer is to that.
No, that was actually a really good comprehensive answer. Did anybody else want to sprinkle something on top of that?
I would say just briefly, for employers, we would urge them to have employee practice liability insurance and take a look at that and make sure that they have all the coverages in place. Discrimination, sexual harassment, every business should
Say
that
the
covered.
name of the insurance type again.
Employer practices liability insurance.
Oh, that's a new one.
It's often included in some package policies.
Does my policy include that? No, I'm just kidding.
I second Chris, definitely. Yeah. And then I would also say, so for small nonprofits, I don't think there's any of you here, but director and officers insurance is one that I tell small nonprofits to get, but it's kind of optional. I would not call that optional now. I don't, right. I would strongly encourage that you get it, in part because we just don't know. So it might be a waste of that $1,000 or $2,000 a year for you, or it might not be. I think we're all just waiting to see what happens in the courts.
Wait, so I have a question. So for both of those types of insurances, would it cover decisions that are made or practices around COVID? Because we said before that those things aren't really being covered.
Well, kind of insurance is going to kick in if there's, litigation regarding, if there are suits filed.
So like if I'm an employee and I sue you as my employer because I feel that I'm being wrongly exposed to COVID at work or something like that, and it's gross negligence.
I think
my employer practice liability kick in?
Yeah, I think you're going to see that evolve a little bit, but yes, in terms of, because they're suing you for either wrongful termination or discrimination because they refused to get the vaccine or whatever it is. That's what that employment practices liability insurance covers.
And that would cover the loss, the paying the lawyers.
Yeah, it would cover like legal fees and payout, thing like that.
It's a good question, Serenna, because I think,
yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, Chris.
No, go ahead.
I think that sometimes I get like really specific on a question and it helps to like back up a little bit. And my mentor used to say, you're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. So, and I think, so for example, I doubt there's not going to be like a COVID policy that's going to cover you guys if an employee gets COVID and they die. But if an employer does something, and this is all, so if an employer does something, let's say an employer requires you to get into a van with a coworker and refuses to allow you to wear a mask. It's very hard to imagine this, but let's just pretend a really bad situation and you get COVID from your coworker. There's a lot of things there that maybe could meet some sort of standard. That is different than what I would think of as COVID insurance, right? Insurance that covers COVID. Instead, what's going on is your employer is violating a standard as to what is appropriate. And I think that's where insurance kicks in. And similarly, I was talking about
workplace. It falls under not providing a safe workplace if you're not allowing your employee to
wear a mask.
Do you guys see Joe's question?
I did, Joe. I saw your question there. What type of cases? So there are a lot of cases. I don't have specific case information I can give you, but A lot of employees are suing their employers for wrongful termination. A lot of employers are suing the insurance companies for not being covered under business interruption coverage when they were shut down. For example, restaurants are suing the insurance companies because they had to shut down due to the pandemic, and they're not getting any money from that because those policies excluded communicable disease. And so, we are going to see, the outcome of those cases, and that may encourage change in the industry, whether they, insurance companies are already making steps to more specifically word the exclusion of communicable disease in their documents, in the documentation, so they can. So they're changing that already, but the outcome of the cases is going to determine. They're going to set the precedent going forward.
Yeah.
So you're going to see
There's
less
a lot of that.
litigation regarding it.
I know of no cases. So it's always funny for me to talk with insurance agents because they actually know of things even before they're filed, and they know of like lots of things because they have a lot of inside information about the way disputes get settled. But I spoke with some of my colleagues, and we actually have seen no cases come out of COVID related issues yet. Certainly there will be, but there is time to kind of wait and see. So when something wrong happens and you want to seek redress in a court, you have a period of time depending on the type of harm you suffered. It's called the statute of limitations. So if people suffered a physical harm, they have 3 years to try to come after that. With employment related liabilities, I think it's shorter. I think it's 1 year. I could be wrong. Contracts, you have 6 years. So if someone is mad at you because you didn't fulfill a contract, you might not know if they're going to sue you for 4 years now going forward. So my guess is that the plaintiff's attorneys, which is a specific type of attorney, they're gonna chart the way for us. There's going to be some big lawsuits. My guess there's going to be a lot of big lawsuits with big hospital systems and big nursing home systems. And then depending on the way that those things go, the rest of us will pay attention to changes. And I think also, and I'm sorry to, I think
No, go ahead.
We might see, I've not heard of this happening, but logically this seems possible, that New York State or the federal government will actually impose different requirements on insurance. We know that this has already happened in like little droplets with respect to healthcare insurance, like paying for the cost of your test, for example, right? That's been like, there's been little droplets of the regulators themselves saying, all right, this is just something you're going to cover, regardless of whether, so this was kind of a big deal for those of you who don't know it. Insurance is there to cover you if you're sick, right? But you had to incur costs, we all did, even when we ourselves were not symptomatic of anything. So in health insurance companies were like, yeah, I'm not covering that. And then the federal government, they came in and they said, oh, yes, you are. You're going to cover tests for asymptomatic people because that's what we need. And that was a regulatory governmental change. There will probably be some versions of that, I imagine, over the next few years.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see, if that happens and what those are going to look like. If you think about it, they after 9/11, we were required to, insurance companies were required to, offer terrorism coverage and or have clients sign something specifically saying they were excluding terrorism coverage because terrorism was redefined after that. And so they had to, the whole insurance industry had to, redefine what terrorism was and what was going to be paid out. And so we may see the same kind of things happening to the industry in general in the next, it'll be interesting 5 to 10 years to see how things change.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and I have 2 questions, one from me and one from Carly. And if somebody wants to tackle one of these each, that would be great. Earlier, Serenna talked about deposits from clients, from the client's view, that vendors are more open to returning deposits, et cetera. But where is the protection for caterers and vendors and their ability to protect themselves? And also knowing that booking fees don't need to be paid back, what about price increases in food costs, that influence signed contracts, and also when trying to accommodate clients and move weddings and events to next year, but the cost of food and services are increased by 15 to 25%, what's a vendor to do in that case to protect themselves?
Well,
Whether that be contractually or legally, what do you, or insurance wise, what do you think?
Well, from a legal perspective and a contract person who writes contracts perspective, you can have an out in terms of like, okay, this is the cost of food now. And if it should go over a certain price, like, or gas, or, whatever it is that's central to your contract, like if it goes over this price, then the parties agree to renegotiate. And it's, you obviously you have to specify it. It's wise to specify an exact number, because sometimes people will try to be vague, and then there's a fight about whether that's too much or too little. So that's one way to protect yourself. And so basically a contract, like say like for a wedding, it would explicitly say this based on the price, like here's your menu, it's based on the price of steak today. Should steak rise above 9 cents an ounce, or how much, whatever it is, or exceed $13, whatever, then the parties agree to renegotiate, and probably your wedding the person who's wanting the wedding is going to insist on, well, I will agree to renegotiate, and also I want an out if I can't meet the price. So
I imagine there's specific wording that would change, regarding in the, vendor customer contract to change those things. I mean, I can't really speak on it much from an insurance standpoint. There might be, insurance might kick in if there was a lawsuit for breach of contract or something like that down the road, I guess. But I think probably, specifically wording those types of changes in your contracts going forward would be beneficial, right?
I
would
think
cover you.
it's the way to do business, especially like, I don't know if technically they keep saying there's no inflation, but it feels inflationary to me. I have to pay my employee more than they're offering at Mobile.
Yeah, I know. I used to own a commercial millwork company here in Dryden, and part of our contract included, because projects would always get delayed and delayed and delayed, and you could have a contract for a project going over 3 years, and the price of materials is going to go up, especially, I didn't have to experience the increased cost of materials during the pandemic here, but material prices are always going up. And so we always had specific wording in our contracts for increased cost of materials due to project delays. And then we'd have to see what those were and negotiate a change order and things like that.
Well, I
But
unfortunately have to run. I have a 1 o'clock.
No, thank you for being here. I'm actually going to let Carly squeeze in her last question, though. And if anyone else has to taper off, because we did have a stop at 1, we'll just consider this some overtime hours for those that are going to watch this later on the recording. But Serenna, thank you so much for being here. And are you cool if anyone reaches out and wants your contact info that I share people with your email address?
100%. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
Carly, did you want to read off that last question to wrap us up?
Sure. I know overtime minutes are expensive for lawyers, so I'll be quick. So this question was actually for Carrie. Carrie, I know that you more specifically were here today to speak in terms of large business and nonprofits, but there are businesses in the area who throughout COVID had experienced a lot of challenges in providing health and safety to their workforce. And because that's such a subjective and often, like you were saying, very personal opinion, and every situation is different, that it can cause a lot of hardships for businesses. And have you experienced, or do you know of any sort of, or have any best practices around like identifying a threshold where there's just only so much a business can bear before they just can't meet demands or can't meet needs? Because there have been, from even what I've seen, shutdowns, where people just couldn't make it work. And from a litigation standpoint, is there any responsibility to just an endless provision of health and safety to employees? And then maybe from an insurance standpoint, even, Chris, is there any sort of protection for businesses in those same capacities?
It's really been so hard, isn't it? Like every now and again, it reminds me like what a collective traumatic experience it is. And we're like looking down the barrel of year 3. So what the law says is that if an employee requests additional accommodations above whatever the employer can do while maintaining its functionality, the employer only has to accommodate them until there's an undue burden. Okay, so an example of this is with disability. Let's just say somebody can no longer perform the job description of like lifting boxes, right? You can't do the actual job, which requires lifting boxes that weigh more than 35 pounds a box or something. If the employer cannot reasonably accommodate that request without jamming itself up too much, then that's all you have to do. The employee is no longer a good fit. And we're seeing this in really sad ways with healthcare providers, where there are nurses or other healthcare providers who legitimately cannot get the vaccine because they have allergies, and they are actually having to terminate employment, and they're not eligible for unemployment insurance. That's a real outcome. It's rare, but it is in fact happening, and it's a challenge. And actually you should be careful about that with unemployment insurance, because I think it could be if you have a true exemption that they just can't accommodate, then you're eligible for unemployment insurance. But if you as an employee simply are not willing to accommodate, then you don't have it. I keep getting lost with the question. So your question was, what do you do if you're a small employer? Just do the best you can. I'm seeing no litigation. And I kind of hope for all of us that we like collectively can just manage to shuffle through in a way with as little harm to everybody. I think to be accommodating. And one thing that I'll say, Ithaca is not perfect, and it is extremely self-congratulatory. I'm like the rural poor. I'm like from one of the surrounding counties. So the conversations with my family have been very colorful over the last couple of years. I'll just say that. But as I expect is happening more here than in other places, the employers should be trying, and the employees should be trying, and we'll hit the middle. I think there's going to be bigger risk in places where employers are not trying. If you are an employer and you believe that COVID is a hoax, and damned if anybody is going to make you accommodate anything, that's a risk. That's what you don't want to do.
Great answer. Great answer. Did you have anything else to add, Chris?
I don't have a ton to add, except just to reiterate, as an employer, make sure you have employment practices liability in place. Sometimes that's included in your business package. Larger not-for-profits have it included with their directors and officers insurance that they have as well for their boards. But make sure you have it. Double check your policy, see if it's in there. Feel free, if you want me to take a look at it, I'd be happy to look over everything for you and let you know what you have and what you don't and what you might need, because that's what we're here for. But yeah, that's because that's what's going to kick in if there's any kind of lawsuit or litigation or fees that need to be paid if there's a wrongful termination or any type of discrimination.
Yeah, and again, I think in summation, it just sounds like collectively we're kind of just taking everything as it comes, and it's one of those situations where insurance really is doing what it's meant to do and preparing for any worst case scenario. So I think that you all have shared a lot of really great information today. So I'm going to offer for anyone that's watching this video later, Chris and Carrie, are both of you okay if people want to reach out to me here at the chamber, if I share your contact information for them to get in touch with either of you if they have any additional questions after watching this?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, awesome.
Oh, there was a real quick
Yeah.
for that last question, and I ran into that when I had my business. If you're an employer and you're dealing with those kinds of situations with employees, where you're going to be terminating them or reprimanding them or anything like that, or if they have any issues, just document everything. Document. Be as specific as you possibly can, because if it ever gets out of control and goes further, you're going to really need that documentation. So, as a former employer and now, an insurance agent, definitely document everything.
That's really good information as well. All right, so we are almost at 1:10. I don't see any more questions in the chat. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone who was able to join us in person today. I want to say thank you again to Chris Roscoe, Miss Carrie Pollak. Did I get it right, Carrie, on the way out?
Pollak, like Jackson.
Like Jackson Pollak?
Yeah,
That's
All
right.
right, that way I won't forget ever
The
again.
fish. The fish.
And to Miss Serenna McCloud, thank you all for being here. Thank you again to our sponsors, Borg Warner and Tompkins Trust Company. Be on the lookout for more of these lunch and learns that we'll be hosting. That'll be industry specific throughout the rest of 2022. And wishing you all health and good days ahead. And we'll be in touch soon.
thanks,
All right,
guys.
everyone. Have a good one.
Take care.
Everyone.